crazy!
If I didn't know any better, I'd say it was all connected.
This all says war.
Oh, shit.
Welcome to the Cartoon Insider, where cartoonists talk about animation, comics, and all things related to the industry that we love. If you dig what we're doing, hit the like button and subscribe. And today we are talking about Watchmen Chapter 2, of which we are all a part of, including myself. I'm actually part of this one. So I'd like to go ahead and welcome back producer director Brandon Vietti and art director John Hoekstra.
Thank you for doing these.
Yeah. Well, we've got to do what we can, right? This is essential. I mean, it's a labor of love, but it's a relatively modest budget that we had to work with, right? And that would also translate to publicity as well. So we've got to do what we can to kind of get the word out. And I think with good word of mouth and some good reviews, which are even now coming in, that'll help boost the awareness of it, which is part of why we're doing that here. So last time we talked about chapter 1 and how it got greenlit and developed. We discussed some of the many challenges of translating a comic book masterpiece into an animated movie. We kind of covered like the whys and the hows of the production and how we're all big fans of the material. And so, like, yeah, if there's anyone who hasn't heard that, I definitely encourage anyone listening now to go back. We talked for about an hour, and we covered a lot of, the initial stages of how it got started and what it was like working on that first chapter. So now it's time to talk about chapter 2. Like I said, I told you guys I'd get this right out of the way because we got a lot of good stuff to talk about. The only thing that I do want to mention, and I did put in a request to have that edited on IMDb, but on the IMDb page, I'm not listed as the co-director, but I did actually work on this film. So I'm just putting that out there. It did happen. And then
Yeah.
hopefully, Chris Mertens, who was our editor on 1 and 2, he kind of helped me through the process of how to put in that request. I guess that's happened. It's not that uncommon for it to happen. So I guess it's happened to him, and he said it could be anywhere from hours to a couple of days, or on the long end, maybe a few weeks before it gets approved and updated. So yeah, I won't worry about it. But
Yeah, I'm so sorry that happened. I mean, your contribution was so important, and I was so happy that I did have the opportunity to call you up to help me out because, as you said, a bit of a modest budget for the production of these two movies. They
yeah.
did overlap. So while I was very entrenched on finalizing a lot of the chapter 1 storyboards and working with John on designs and editing and all of that kind of stuff. Chapter 2 had to continue ahead, and I was absent pretty much.
Mhm.
And it was a bummer too, because I wished we could have worked together more. Vincent, you and I go back so many years, and I was really excited that, we could carve out budget and time for you to come on board and help out. And on an amazing story, I was looking forward to working with you, but the schedule was such that we really had to divide our duties. I was heavily focused on chapter 1, and you really helped tremendously in getting chapter 2 off the ground.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember first day it was like, well, here's a big pile of boards to look at, but which was awesome. I just, it was great. It was already usually when you start on a project that happens later, there's a lot of initial meetings and breaking down of script. And it was at that stage where you had already handed out to not all of your sequences, but a good number of them, and they'd been worked on to some degree. And I remember I had stuff to look at from Danica. That was like she was one of the board artists. I worked with her stuff a lot. I think Gene King, Tom DeRosier. Hope I'm getting those names right. Matthew Peters, who we all know. I mean, he produces and directs a bunch of stuff over there. and as does Sam Liu and Chris Berkeley. So really, yeah, some really stellar names to have attached. It was great to be working with their stuff. They gave me a lot to work with, and it was great doing all the back and forth with you as well. After I do my pass and show it to you, and we discuss things. And yeah.
Yeah. I remember us like frantically trying to find 30 minutes here or an hour there if possible, just to like squeeze in some conversation about creative direction, how to hook up with the first chapter and all of that. It was very, very tight and not as in depth as I would have liked it to be. But at the end of the day, I think we got it done, obviously. And I think we had a good time doing it. But yeah, always wish for more, right? More time, more of the creative time. I don't think there's a director in Hollywood that would say otherwise. No matter what their budget is, you always want a little more time to, get into the creative with your team, with your friends.
I really liked it was pretty late in the hour when that sequence in Karnak where they're going to pursue Ozymandias, and it's Owlman and Rorschach. They run through and they team up again. As I recall, that was a very late addition to the boarding process. It just needed that something extra. Uh,
Yeah.
that is something you came up with, which I thought was great.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to see it. I mean, in the book, I think it's really just Dr. Manhattan that pursues Ozymandias into the back room, which
Mhm.
ultimately leads to trapping Manhattan and disintegrating him. And I wasn't quite sure why Night Owl and Rorschach stayed in the main room next to all of the monitors. And yeah, I really wanted to see them come in almost as a team,
Hmm.
come through the doors and just have this powerful moment where you see this group sort of reunited and sort of have this moment that I think you've been imagining through the whole story, the reunion and these three acting as a group of heroes together. So it's very brief, and then we're kind of back into what the book intended, and just it felt like for a movie, as you're building to the climax, you needed that little something extra, that team moment
Mhm.
uh, that hopefully people will really dig.
Well, it's something it's true to the characters, it's true to the book. It doesn't change anything about the characters. It's a moment that we I felt at least I wish we could have seen. And there's a few moments like that. Um, Hollis has got a moment like that that's really good that wasn't in the original book.
And that
That
was a really great addition by Straczynski, our writer, James Straczynski. Brilliant sort of remix there, where originally in the book, Dan is visited by one of the two detectives that have become characters throughout the entire 12 issues. And he switched it out with Hollis, which was so important and just so much better because then it's sort of your last, especially in the two
okay.
chapter format.
One moment. Possible. Okay. I would assume everyone's read the book at this point, that especially that's watching this, but
Hope so.
maybe they haven't. No, I want to mention this. I'm just gonna say spoilers, possible spoilers. If you care about spoilers, I mean, we stay very true to the story, very true to the source material. So if you read the source material, you're not going to be thrown for a loop, but please proceed with that
Yeah.
being
Well,
said.
as I
Right
say,
before Hollis.
no, Jam Straczynski's swap there, switching out the police officer that visits Dan with Hollis instead, was so necessary and needed, I think, for the two movie format because in our second chapter, Hollis just didn't get a lot of screen time before. And here's the big spoiler, of course,
Yep.
Hollis Mason dies.
Yeah.
And so to have this really great moment
Mhm.
where Hollis visits Dan with a warning, but also in a way that sort of you get to see these two old friends, these two old night owls, kind of connecting over the larger plot and investigation. You see their relationship. You see the father son nature of their relationship one more time before Hollis is murdered. And that adds a lot more resonance to his loss having that moment. So I
Oh,
thought that was a brilliant change from Straczynski.
Yeah, it was very impactful in the comic. I'd rarely read anything. And really, when I think about it, it was other stuff by Alan Moore, maybe Frank Miller in those early years that made me feel verklempt. You know, but yeah, it was like another level. We all three of us, we had we were lucky enough to get a special screening on the WB lot on a big screen, and to see it with that sound and be fully immersed in it on a big screen, I really felt those moments. And I was, you know, I read the comic book many times. I worked on the movie with you, and still, that scene got me, and a few other scenes got me too. The death of Rorschach, that got me.
Well,
Yeah.
that's great. I mean, credit there to Tim Kelly, our composer, for crafting some amazing music that certainly helped and elevate those emotional moments, and also Atlas Oceanic, who did the sound design, and
Mhm.
everybody got the mission to, bring the realism and bring the emotions where it was needed. So,
Yeah, that was pitch perfect. John, what were some of the challenges between working on the second film versus the first film? I mean, you laid the groundwork really well in the first film, but you
Well,
had,
the big one was like we started to run out of money. So when we got closer to the end of the second one, I basically had to do everything by myself.
hmm
So like, the cat and the squid and all the like most challenging things, we pushed it down the road for later. Somebody else will solve that eventually. And then, and then it was just me. So that was fun to do all the hard stuff by myself.
well, you were pretty amazing, all things considered. I always felt like I got what I needed. Like I felt like you were under the gun and under the weight of all the stuff that needed to get done, but you know, Karnak was a major set piece, and that's the geography of that really had to be figured out
Right.
for how they move up, you know, from down at the bottom where the television stairs are, and you know, going up to the stairs to the next level. There's a lot of major stuff happening there, and that really had to get figured out, and you guys really banged that out uh,
Yeah.
amazingly. I think I did a drawing. I think Brandon also did a drawing that was sort of like an overhead schematic,
Mhm.
and you guys took that and realized it really well and quickly.
A lot
And
of things with Gibbons, he generally figured out the room
mhm,
to a point where I could make it spatially make sense. So it
right,
wasn't like, we were trying to figure out something that doesn't work. It sort of worked. And then there was parts where we were like, I don't know, maybe this does connect this way.
right. That
Like
was
with,
fascinating. That's fascinating.
yeah.
Someone who loved the comic and reread it going into this project. I read the big ultimate edition that had all the notations and everything, and you know was in continued awe of Gibbon's visual realization of all this stuff. And I studied all the comic book panels in Karnak, and but you know, one man can only do so much, and it was interesting to see like little inconsistencies where I'm not sure that angle works with that other angle,
Yeah.
but that was the kind of stuff you kind of had to like figure out and make work. And
Yeah, I mean, the meditation room works. It's all like Karnak is a physical place. You could build it, you could walk throughout the whole sets. There's no guessing work. It's all there.
mhm,
that's the
So,
one room I think that pretty much stayed accurate to the comic 100%.
yeah,
We tailored the inside of Karnak a little bit, and that was to match the editing to the script.
hmm,
In the book that really shows off the interiors of Karnak, there's a lot of walking and talking, a
right,
lot of walking and talking. And the space covered during all of that talking was huge because there was a lot of talking and because you can kind of cheat space a little bit when you're going from panel to panel. But in the real time that plays out in a movie space, and because we had to edit down some of the dialogue, we also had to change the space a little bit so that not as much room needs to be covered.
right,
So I think whereas in the comic book, a lot of action played out over two floors, in Karnak, we had to kind of combine sets, merge into one floor of space, still built it as a two-story structure, but
Right.
we had to change the space to fit the timing of the dialogue that connected with the walking.
Well, even with the atrium, like we built it out so that you could shoot the exact same shot in there where the attendants die. But instead, we moved it into the main room. But
Oh,
it
right.
all works.
I
It's all
remember.
there,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
had to. It was too much to just all of a sudden jump to a jungle area and not explain how the hell that worked.
Right. That sort of greenhouse in a domed
Yeah,
structure, which was so great. It's such an interesting location. It killed us to cut that, but
Mhm.
it was a necessity of time
Yeah.
and design budget.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the type of stuff just comes down to having to work within the limitations. Um, so yeah, part of the process. Um, yeah. So what were some of your favorite moments in the film, John?
Definitely the entrance of the squid. That was like, holy shit. And what's really crazy is I didn't imagine that's how we were gonna do like how they materialized.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting because
Hmm.
I never thought about like Adrian figured out his version of the teleporter and it wouldn't be exactly like, John's would, but it was really cool how it came in. I like the psychic blast part. I think that was good. I
Yeah.
like that in the comic, in the supplemental material, it talks about the guy that they originally used to modify him and turn him into the squid.
Hmm.
And that, like for the super comic nerds, they can go in there and figure out like all the Easter eggs that we tied into that. But it's all there. Everything plugs right in. The
Yeah, we
fun
didn't
thing.
have to mention it, but it's there. For those that know, it's kind of there. But if you
Mhm.
don't know, you don't
You know,
need
yeah.
to.
Yeah, that
But
was
I like how we did the island because that little, Ariel smiley face was fun. That was something that wasn't exactly spelled out in the comic, but we added in there, which was fun.
I
mhm.
I added that too because it also it needed to be something that would have attracted the attention of the comedian.
Mhm.
He
Right.
says early on that, he looked out like an airship window and saw that island. And I'm sure he's passing many islands, but one had to catch his attention and for a reason. So there is some reason behind it. It wasn't just a gimmick to kick the
Right.
movie off with yet another hidden smiley face, but
Right.
there was a little logic and thought behind that as well to tie into the story.
Mm. I even like the meatballish eyeball things that we had on Mars. My wife and one of our crew was watching it afterwards, and they're like, "Why is the rock shaped like that?" And then when you pulled back, they were like, "Oh,
Mhm.
damn, that was good." So it's fun.
That moment worked well. It's like how are you going to pull out from like in a comic it does that, but yeah, the way we did that I thought worked well. Um, so how was it? I gotta I gotta experience a little. Not everything had been recorded, so there were still additional sessions that needed to be done with some of the actors. So I was just those are of course we live in an age now out of the pandemic where that's all done uh, virtually. Not it used to be in person, but so I was literally just a fly on the wall watching you kind of work with the actors. But how was that working with Katie Sackhoff?
I mean, great. You're right. It was such a bummer that because of pandemic restrictions and stuff, we were unable to all get together in a room and discuss the project and work together. So yeah, it was all done through Windows like we're doing now. Um, there was only one exception, actually. Titus Welliver, actually, we did get to meet. Finally, the restrictions lifted at the end of our scheduling for the ADR part of our work. And
Mm.
so we did get to finally meet him in person. So that was great. And we got to, at that point too, we also got to bring some footage to show him and he really liked,
Oh, neat.
where we were going with our visuals and stuff. So that was cool to be able to share what we're making. Um, but yeah, working with everybody was fantastic. And And I thought Katie did an exceptional job in part two. Her character, Laurie Specek, is really a focal point, I think, in chapter two in particular. Her relationship with Dan is sort of the emotional through line, but her emotional up and down, she really delivers a roller coaster ride of emotions throughout the second chapter. And that's a lot of work to carry. And I think she just performed it so well.
Yeah, and what's crazy is that they had to all perform like you know, Matthew Rice, who played Dan. I mean, their relationship with one another is very crucial and it's an essential part of the story, and they had to perform those completely separately.
Yeah.
Uh, and it worked, man. Watching that on the big screen, that's a testament to their performances, being able to, I guess, imagine their interaction with this other person. Also to the board artists.
And our other director, Jamie Thomason, our voice director,
Oh, yeah,
who also has to kind of keep in his mind all of the performances of the various actors that
yeah,
whose characters will be together in a scene, but
mhm,
actors are in totally separate places. So he is kind of tracking mentally energy levels of various performances and helping, each actor kind of dial in to hook up with a performance that was recorded a week ago, a month ago.
yeah. I remember us talking a lot about their scenes and what was going on between them and how to shoot it, how to make it work. Um, and then also, I had talked to you a little bit about this after the screening. I loved how I don't know if it's cinematic is really the word I'm looking for, but it had a very live action quality to their scenes together, where you're on their faces, you're close on them, you're seeing a lot of subtle uh, facial acting that you don't normally associate with animation. Something that you think of more as live action, where you can just kind of be on there, but it was there, and that was interesting talking to you about that afterwards. So we took it to, as much as we were able to within the schedule and what we could on the boarding level, and then it went to overseas and was animated. But then when that stuff came back, you yourself actually took a pass on a lot of those scenes to kind of nuance it even more and kind of get that right moment, that right bit of acting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, through the first movie as well. And, again, because of kind of the lean budget and stuff, we didn't have a dedicated, uh, like director for animation. So a
Mhm.
lot of that came down to me for notes and working directly with Mir and dialing in the sort of acting style for this movie that is very different than most animated things I've worked on, that might push exaggeration a little bit because animation, there's a sort of, I think, expectation that a lot of audiences have with what sorts of performances you expect from animation. And this material that from Watchmen is so grounded and so realistic, it needed to be dialed back into something that feels more like a live action performance to really, I think, respect the source material. So that was something that we were always working with Mir and their animation team, trying to dial in these acting beats to something that felt extremely real and grounded, because the minute it would slip into something that was a little more, for lack of a better word, cartoonish,
Mhm.
um, it just, it just burst the bubble of the reality that we were trying to sell.
Right. And that really gave you something that was um, different than what you could get from the comic book reading experience.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
act
that's a
performance.
good point. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's a, I guess, a limitation in a way of any book reading experience where the reader is creating the performance. And that performance in your mind, any individual reader's mind, is probably going to be different than maybe what Alan Moore intended or what Dave Gibbons was thinking. Now we're bringing actors into it that are bringing, their knowledge from their careers and how to nuance every single word in a sentence as they're performing it. Again, married with what our storyboard artists, you as a director coming up with, and then what is ultimately happening with an animator overseas. So there's a lot of teamwork and thought put in at many levels to crafting these performances, and hopefully it's all of it is serving to sort of elevate the source material.
Yeah, and you combine it with the music and yeah, and I'm telling you, that big screen, uh,
Yeah,
I really
boy, I
felt
wish I wish
it's
everybody could experience the movie on a big screen and, with big sound, because this is just, I mean, really anything that we do, right? That's like the ideal way. You don't want people watching this on their phone through earpods or something, right? It's
and that's
you just
watch that's something you casually have on while you're doing dishes. It's
no,
you're gonna miss all of it.
it doesn't hit the same.
One thing I liked about the version that we did versus something like the Snyder version is Snyder's really focuses on Rorschach and really makes him like a hero and
Yeah.
makes his death like very like sad because like he felt like it felt like Batman died or something in that version. Our
Mhm.
version has like more about the Dan and Laurie story with them kind of being the main, really what the story is about, and Rorschach being like sadistic psychopath who dies at the end.
Yeah.
Those are
Although
interesting,
I
very
still
different.
though I still
Yeah,
felt but it was I agree with you. It was like it was a more I don't know if honest. It was the Rorschach in the comics.
right,
Like
right,
in the I mean Snyder made choices, his own creative choices to kind of like I think he wanted his Owlman to be more heroic,
mhm,
like it wasn't like out of shape or
right, right,
self-deprecating. He want and he wanted, yeah, he didn't really, I'm not sure he acknowledged the faults of Rorschach that
right,
that Alan wrote into the character as much because he just thought he was so damn cool, like a lot of people do. I think
right.
he's cool, but I think you want to be honest about it. I think that the thing with the all the Watchmen characters is they're incredibly complex, treated like real fallible human beings.
Mhm.
So they're all very messy, like humans, most humans are. So so even with their faults, I still felt I felt that gut punch. And and despite all his faults, I mean he's got a lot of them. And he's psychotic, he's you know, he's homophobic. He's he reads the New Frontiersman, which is like the equivalent of some far right conspiracy magazine. He's got a lot of problems. But you have to and he views everything as very black and white. There's no shades of gray with this guy. So but down at some level, you still, I don't know, at least I did. I still, you still have to admire his certain aspects about him, his uncompromising drive to uncover the truth.
Well, you're right. I think, well, I'd said before that the relationship between Dan and Laurie is sort of the emotional through line. I
Mhm.
think I also should have added, I think the friendship between Night Owl and Rorschach is also a through line. It's just we don't get the screen time with them.
Mhm.
So I did work a lot. I did bump around a little bit of the structure that Straczynski had wrote to sort of try to juxtapose scenes between cutting from a scene with Dan and Laurie, directly to Rorschach in prison, and
Mhm.
then come up with like try to find like crafty transitions. So you're kind of dissolving off of Dan and onto Rorschach, and you helped me come up with some great shots like that.
Yeah.
I think ending with there's a scene in chapter 2 with uh, uh, Walter in prison,
And pro
and big
yeah.
figure is walking away, and we kind of end on this profile shot, but we dissolve to a matching but
Mhm.
opposite profile shot of Dan down in the owl's nest. And you kind of get that sense through the dissolve of these two guys looking at each other.
Mhm.
And there are other examples of that throughout the movie, but all of that is designed to try to build a relationship between these two characters without ever having them in the same room. And that was like incredibly important because you have to buy that Dan wants to break this guy out of prison and find out what he knows from his previous investigation. And not just because of the investigation, but because they are colleagues, there's friends, there's a little momentum there on the friendship side for Dan to help his friend out. Dan found some value in this guy. Dan admits, like, yeah, that mask ate his brains over the years and he's weird, but there's still something important in his mind that is valuable to this investigation.
Right.
And so it becomes like a triangle of like three friends, you know. It really is, they are the three core characters. And you have to be invested in that relationship. And that was really important for us to get across in the filmmaking. Yeah, again, even when they're not on screen together.
Mm.
That's totally true. And that's part of the tragedy of the Rorschach character is he wasn't always that kind of far gone, you know? And you see that that was really well uh, played, and you really saw that in this interpretation of what they had in the past, and they were sort of kind of getting the gang back together, you know, but it wasn't quite the same. There's that great scene when they're in the owl ship underwater where Owlman sort of kind of flips out on him, and then Rorschach totally was like, "Hey, no, you know, you're right," and that totally like, because I was with Dan, I'm like, "God, yeah, you are such a bastard," and then when he humbles out like that, you're immediately like, "Oh, like there is still something in there somewhere. There's some humanity." So yeah, the complexity of that was tricky, but well
And then
played.
it makes the loss of Rorschach at the end.
Yeah.
There's much more tragedy there. It's not just a you know a, a glorious death.
Yeah.
um,
It was
you know,
it still felt like a real gut punch. And then to have Owlman, Dan, witness it, you know, and then fall to his knees. That
that was that was important. I know that was not in the book. It
but
was
it
in
should have been. I would argue it should have been. And
Yeah.
that's why you put it in there. So
well, and Zack Snyder had done
Yeah.
that in
yeah,
his movie.
right.
I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Laurie was there.
I
So
don't think so either. In the comic, of course, neither one of them were there. They were making love back in
yeah,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
they
yeah.
went and took a nap by the pool, and I wasn't quite sure
Oh, weird.
why exactly it played out that way.
Mhm.
I think they were just distraught and comforting each other after realizing what Veidt had pulled off and what they were going to have to cover up. And I think that was the intent. But it was so necessary for Dan to see the death of his friend and to kind of honor what was in the book, see Laurie there to comfort him,
Mm.
Mhm.
and to see Manhattan see Laurie and Dan comforting each other in that dark moment. That's, I think, what he has the slightest of smiles when he sees her comforting him. And
Mm.
that is from the book, because in the book, Manhattan saw Laurie and Dan sort of comforting each other by the pool in the book. And there was a very slight smile there. And
Yeah.
it was like his sort of giving them that he knew that they would be okay together. He was comfortable after on Mars, kind of stating like he was really thrown by Laurie sleeping with Dan. Now he's okay with it. He's walking away from it. It's okay for him to sort of exit not just the picture with them, but our galaxy, I guess, as
Hmm.
he says later.
Yeah. You know, what's great too is a lot of people, you know, who read it, even reread the comic, or were always struggling to figure out how the black, I mean, in the Snyder version, he didn't even include it in this theatrical version. He just kept it as a separate thing, uh,
Mm.
animated, which was an interesting choice. But there was always a lot of questions like, what does this have to do with the main story? And I think the way that we handled it in part two, I think you get it. And I know, Brandon, you were very careful to try and tie the images of what was happening in the real world with the comics, even more than in the comics, so that you could see those parallels.
Yeah. And again, that was a big help from Straczynski there, kind of figuring out the best way for us in a movie format to bounce back and forth between Black Freighter content and the story itself. And I think,
Mm.
we even found better ways as we were progressing through the storyboards and stuff. But yeah, it was definitely a big goal of ours to really tie that together and really bring to a point the realization of the narrator from the Black Freighter as he's coming to his final realization of his journey. We're seeing the same thing with Adrian Veidt, with Ozymandias, as he's kind of coming to the ultimate point of his journey.
Hmm.
And he's completely silent. He's got nobody to talk to. So the the Black Freighter is kind of doing that for him and helping you understand what's going on in his mind and how he came to this point in his journey.
Right. Who was the artist that drew those images?
Francesco Francavilla.
That,
So yeah, I was so happy that he was free to help us out because he, for those that don't know, is I think very well known in the comics community, and I think he's done tremendous work with like dark psychological horror, and I think
Mhm.
he has a style that to me is it kind of harkens back to an older time. I like his style because it reminds me of a lot of books I read
Mhm.
when I was younger,
Yeah.
and Black Freighter is definitely psychological horror, and Francesco just gets that.
Mhm.
And so he was pretty excited to come on board and, translate some of Dave's comic panels uh, faithfully. But in other cases, we had to change the compositions because we were using those comic book panels
Mhm.
as starting points for compositions for the movie. And we wanted that sort of poetic resonance between the visuals of the comic and the visuals of our movie, just as Alan Moore planned for there to be words, I think, that had poetic resonance with the plot of the story.
Mhm. Did you give him reference to old EC comics, or is that just something he did naturally?
How I mean, I hired him because I like what he does.
But he already did.
He's already doing that kind of a thing. And then, we had he would color the pages for us in like flat color,
Mhm.
uh, which is also, how they colored comics in like the 80s. And then we would bring that in, and we had a whole department here that really understood what comic printing looked like in the 80s. I mean, these were not just like Photoshop filters to make the printing dot look like this team like understood what printing looked like back then, and were able to duplicate dot patterns and even bleeds, like trying to get sometimes in those old comics, like the printing wasn't quite aligned with the black line art. There would be some
Yeah.
ink bleeds outside. So all of those imperfections and the pulp of the paper and stuff, we were trying to work into all of Francesco's art so that when we would bring the camera in really tight on the art, it would really feel like a 1980s comic book experience.
Yeah.
There's an area where the halftone dots are smudged even, just like a little bit, just so you could feel like the printing wasn't perfect.
Uh-huh. And on the big screen, I really noticed that. Yeah, it was just like looking at one of those old comics from back in the day. Yeah, I'll give a shout out to Jeff Allen too. I got him involved specifically uh, to want to have him work on some of those scenes, since that's something that he's a huge EC horror fan, so I thought that would be cool.
Yeah, he did a great job. Like I loved a lot of his comic panels that he came up with. And then ultimately what I had to do is take a lot of his art and nudge it around so that it would actually fit on a comic book page. Because while sometimes the camera was really in tight on some of the images he came up with,
Mm,
I would find later that we would need like a whole wide shot of the entire page layout. So
mhm.
all of the compositions he came up with had to actually work in a page format. And that's how ultimately Francesco was going to need to draw everything, was in a page layout that actually worked once the camera would zoom out and show the whole page. It's very
Awesome.
tricky. It's
Yeah.
a lot of back and forth trying to figure that out.
Uh-huh. Yeah, how long would you say? I mean, I came on for a relatively short amount of time. You needed some help, and I was super happy you asked me. and very happy to be involved. But you, how long was this entire project for both of you? Both of you were with this for quite a long time.
I was like a year and 7 months or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and probably over 2 years for me. I don't know exactly how long, but obviously I was kind of on before John. I was doing a lot of the script stuff with Straczynski and some of the early days of like prepping art and getting the art direction on track before we finally found John. It was quite a long
Mhm.
for much of the crew. It took us a very long time to crew up the entire crew
Yeah.
Mhm.
because we were starting at a time when the business was just at its absolute biggest, and there were so many productions all around town, and everybody that we knew were they were already working somewhere,
Yeah.
and it took us forever to get staffed up. And meantime, the clock is ticking. Like once you hit go on these productions, like you don't get extra weeks because you had trouble staffing up. Like the weeks are just like ticking by, and we have literally nobody here to do some of the work. So
Well,
that really hurt
I
up
mean,
front.
our character design was a problem with that. Like, I messaged every single person that I knew in the industry that did like more realistic character design, and every single one was either Spider-Verse or What If. So eventually, I uh, talked to Ryan Meinerding, who was in charge of characters for What If, and was like, "Dude, like, give me somebody. I need someone. Like, you have everyone, and Spider-Verse has everyone." So luckily, I got somebody, but by that time, we were so far back that we had to hire something like seven character designers to try and catch up, just with the amount of time we lost. So it was really hard to manage seven different artists and try to keep them all on style and fix every single character. Like it was a huge, huge process to get all this out. It was not like an average show in that way.
Yeah. That length of time, that's unheard of for something that's not a theatrical release. So that helps explain how a lot of that time was just Brandon or just John or just a few people. You know? So yeah, and a relatively small crew when you think about just the grandness and scale of it all.
Right. Yeah. We definitely had the kind of a skeleton crew for the most of it. You know.
All right. All right, guys. Well, I think that about covers it. I'm really excited to see what fans are going to think of this thing. The digital release that came out today, November 26th, the day of this recording. I'll do my best to kind of get this posted up, at least before the weekend. And then what do we have to look beyond the digital? We have what do we have on the dates beyond that as far as releases go?
Well, let's see, Blu-ray and 4K release, I think is just like a week from today as we record this. So I think is that December 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and then as for streaming, I'm not sure. That might be I'm sure that'll be a little later in 25. I'm not quite sure. I don't have a date for that yet.
Yeah. And then
But
eventually on Max, along with
yeah, chapter one is on Max right now as we record this.
mhm. Yep. Hopefully you can find it on there.
Yeah.
Um, but and then maybe a limited theatrical release. We can all start signing petitions. If the fans out there can maybe sign a petition, but man, it's like that's the way it's meant to be seen. Nothing I've worked on has had, more of a need to be seen on a big screen. So if you can't just have a really good sound system in a nice big theater, turn off all the lights, just let yourself be immersed in the story. All right. All right, guys. Real pleasure as usual. Thanks for coming back. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Till next time. Be seeing you.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.